Hello everyone, welcome to Wealth and Wellness Realtors. My name is Karma Dulger.
And I am Ida Janali. We're with Keller Williams Landmark II.
And today we have a very special guest. We have John Felix from Felix Inspections.
Hello everyone, thanks for having me on this platform. I'm really excited to speak inspections today.
Yes, absolutely. And we are actually super excited to have you here as we're going to dive into some very essential information about home inspections and how they are very crucial for buyers, but also even sellers, right? Because they can both use them.
Absolutely.
And I actually wanted to start with the question, what exactly does a home inspector do during an inspection?
Right, so I want you guys to think about a home inspection or a home inspector as the detective of a home, right? The investigator, where, systematically we'll go in and we look at the main components, the main systems of a home, right? We're looking at the HVAC system, we're looking at your plumbing, your electrical, your roof, and even in the structural components of the home, right? To make sure that it's standing up properly. We look into these things and we're looking at it to make sure that we're giving you a proper assessment of the current condition of the home so you can have the information you need in order to proceed with the purchase of your home.
Nice. Okay. And typically, how long does an inspection take?
So the home inspections typically range, right? But typically you can expect to be there for about an hour and a half, depending on the size of the home, right? The more square footage, the more to inspect. So if you're looking at 1,600 to 2,000 square feet, you could be there to an hour and a half. Some inspections can even go 3 hours, depending on how big it is. And if you go bigger than that, then that might require me to bring in additional, inspectors to kind of complete the inspection. It's a good time. It's a good intimate time with the home.
Got it. Nice.
That's great. And what are some of the common issues that you find during home inspections?
Right. So common issues, and a lot of people open their eyes to expecting me to say major things, but it's simple stuff, right? Like GFCI outlets that are not programmed correctly, leaking faucets. That's usually a typical find. And then oftentimes you'll find issues with the HVAC system, right? Your heating system may not be firing correctly or burning properly. Light bulbs are not, on correctly, or the switches are upside down. Those are typical issues because what happens is a lot of do-it-yourselves videos out there, YouTube. And so a lot of folks that are not very handy try to take on these projects on their own. And while they're successful at it, they may install something upside down or, not seal it properly. And then eventually it's causing small issues that will then turn into a big issue. So that's why we try to catch it early before.
Exactly. And what usually happens when you do catch these things earlier? Would you recommend that they go back to the buyer and to the seller as a buyer and try to fix them at that time, or can they fix them afterwards?
Right, so everything depends on the issue, right? Some issues are something that requires a screwdriver and you can fix it right there on the spot. Some of them require a little more of a knowledge base where you may have to involve a licensed contractor or someone who just really knows what they're doing to go in there and fix it. So it really just depends on it. In most cases, I will recommend that, we defer back to the sellers because they still own the property.
Correct.
Right? A buyer is just looking at that point. So we'll refer it back to the to the seller to say, hey, these are the issues that were found during the home inspection. Is there something that you can do about it so when you sell the house, it's corrected? Right? And if that's not something they're willing to do, you guys come in with your negotiation skills and you say, well, you know what, how about you give me a credit for it, or you negotiate common ground where everyone walks away happy.
That's great.
Yeah.
And in the home buying process, why do you think they should not skip an inspection? Or they should or should not skip an inspection?
Phenomenal question. Why shouldn't you skip a home inspection? Look, you're spending $500,000, $1 million, sometimes $2 million on a home. And to buy a home and not understand how the house is operating, how it's working, it's a big gamble. And you don't want to gamble with your life savings, right? And so not knowing if your heating system is working properly, if your plumbing system is good, if your roof is in good condition, those are big gambles because what happens is if you don't know the condition prior to going into this house, and then you move in, and then a snowstorm happens, it rains, and now you got water in your living room. It's a big to-do. Now, you just spent $1 million on this home. Now, it's $1,200,000 because you had to go spend on your roof. So I think just for peace of mind, right, and that's what home inspections really give people, is that peace of mind to say, you know what, I'm coming into a good home. I know it's safe for me and my family.
Right.
and my pets, right? Because
Exactly.
you know, if you have cats, if you have dogs, you still want it to be a comfortable space
Right.
for everyone to be in. And so I think that, you know, not doing a home inspection is a big gamble.
Yeah, same here. If I were to buy a property, I just can't imagine like not doing an inspection because
Exactly.
sometimes it can seem very nice and very pretty, but
Mhm.
you would not know what is in the inside, right? So only
Correct.
when you actually go there and do the work, then
Right.
you can find out. So,
Yeah, and, you know, and home inspections come in with a lot of anxieties. You know, a lot of
Yeah.
people come into the home, you know, I had to get my rates approved, I had to go get this much money for a
Yeah.
down payment.
Yes.
Getting into the home inspection is like, okay, now this guy's going to tell me all the good and the bad about the house, and no one wants to hear the bad,
Right.
And
right?
that's
But
challenging.
right, it's challenging, but you know, you want to hear the good and the bad. You want to know what you're getting into, and so knowing before you pull that trigger, as I like to say, is helpful because now you know, okay, I need to fix this right away. This can wait 6 months.
Yeah.
This can wait a year, and so knowing how you can prioritize those repairs or those upgrades really, really matters. Because if I find that the dryer is not working well,
Of course.
well, you're probably going to buy a new dryer anyway. So is that really something you want to negotiate, or
Right.
you were going to change it out anyway? So
Correct.
Yeah.
you know,
But it's always good
Makes
to
sense.
know all these things, and you are able to provide them professionally because you know exactly what you're looking for.
Yeah.
absolutely. You know, we do this day in and day out. We're
Right.
looking at houses pretty much every single day.
Exactly.
You know, 2-3 inspections a day,
Mhm.
and so you know, a lot of the stuff becomes common language to us because we're understanding now. I may not be a licensed electrician or a licensed plumber,
Yeah.
but we are licensed in our field, and
Yeah.
so we know enough to say, okay, this requires attention, and you should speak to a licensed plumber. You should speak to a licensed electrician in order to get a full, proper assessment, rather than to guide you into the wrong direction.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, to me, super important. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And talking about the buyer's end and all the important things that they have to look at, how about a seller? Someone that's actually listing their property.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit of how they can prepare their home so you can not only pass inspection, but so they can determine whether or not there are things that they may need to fix beforehand?
Yeah, so when selling a house, I always recommend doing a pre-listing inspection, right? Get a home inspection before you list it, so you know in full detail what is the condition of your home. That way you're prepared for the listing, right? When you're prepared for the sale. And then when your buyer comes in and he brings in his home inspector or her home inspector, you're kind of ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
But just generally, without having to take that step, just look for the basics, right? You know, make sure your house is clean.
Yeah.
Number one, make sure that there's no cracked paint, right? So if you have cracked paint or peeling paint anywhere in the house, go ahead and scrape it off properly, paint it, make it smooth, because that can affect some loans in some cases for the
Right.
buyer. If you have broken windows, like address those issues first. Light bulbs, like the stuff that's still within your reach, right? Without having to go out and spend a lot of money. Fix those small items first. Make sure your heating is working. If you have a heating system, if you have a cooling system, make sure that's working. Just the stuff that you know that may get tested. Because at the end of the day, when you're selling a house and your buyer comes in with your inspector, it's pretty much like your house is being tested,
Correct.
right? It's like you're going for your regents, right? You're going for that big test, and you want to make sure that your home passes that test. And so if you can just stay on top of those what I call small items, but could be big if not treated in time.
Correct.
You know, if you have a leaky faucet, take care of that as well.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
bad drain, unclog it. You know, those basic things. I think that gets the transaction out a little further
Yeah.
than it should be, than having to negotiate, you know, minor items.
Yeah. Sometimes I have buyers asking me, they're confused, you know, because of inspection and appraisal, and they think it's the same thing, and it's definitely not the same thing, right? Can you please give us some more details on that? The difference
Yeah.
between an inspection and an appraisal?
Yeah, of course. So an appraisal is a bank inspection, right? So when you're applying for the loan, the bank typically sends out an appraiser to come look at the house, and they're looking at basic things. I mean, very important things, right? If you're buying a 3-bedroom home, they want to make
Yeah.
sure it's a 3-bedroom home. If it's 2,000 square feet,
Yeah.
they're measuring that it's 2,000 square feet. They don't go into the minutia. They don't go into the details of the home. So like I said, you know, checking your roof. They're not going to check your heating system. They're not going to check your drain system. That's what the home inspector does. The home inspector is there on your behalf as the buyer or as the seller, right? Where they're looking out for your best interest, for your
Correct.
investment, where the bank is only looking at, where the appraiser is only looking at it for the bank's perspective, for their point of view, to say that, okay, you know what, I checked off on these items, we're good as a bank to lend the money. Whereas the home inspector is there on the purchaser side or the seller side to say, okay, this house is cleared and it's good, to be habitable
Correct.
within the state's guidelines,
Yes.
right?
Where you can actually occupy it, bring your family in, and live
Yes.
in, and know that you are being safe.
100%, yeah.
Correct.
Mhm.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit, like, have you ever had an inspection where buyers were shocked by something that came up and they had a really difficult time accepting it or not knowing how to proceed?
Yeah, it happens quite often, actually, surprisingly. And what happens is a lot of people go in to buy a house, and they fall in love with the house. They fall in love with the neighborhood. They fall in love with the facade of the house. They fall in love with the amount of bedrooms, because you start imagining, my mother can go here, my cat can go here, this can be my office. My
course.
husband has a space in the basement for his man
Start
cave.
planning.
I have an attic for the Christmas tree. So you start planning and you start falling in love with the house. And then oftentimes you'll find out that, that bedroom is really not a bedroom. It was the dining room that's converted into a bedroom.
Right.
But the sale can still go through,
Yeah,
or that they, decided they wanted an open concept.
Yeah.
And they opened up a wall. But that wall that they removed was a load-bearing wall. And that wall needs to go back, or a structural beam needs to be installed, because you don't want the house to then sink. And so sometimes when you're doing these inspections, you'll uncover situations like that, right? I mean, I just did one recently where the lady was telling me, she goes, I'm leaving the area where I am because it's rodent infested. And sadly enough, we find lots of traces of rodents. And so that scared her, on its own, and she kind of had to decide whether she wanted to proceed with the transaction or not, because she doesn't want to walk into the same situation. But giving her options and giving her an understanding of how you can remedy certain situations is what really put her at ease. And so she still proceeded with the transaction, which was great for her, because she did love
That's
the property.
wonderful.
Yeah.
So understanding what to do and how to do it is really helpful. But it happens a lot. I always tell people, go in with an open mindset.
Yeah.
Look at your options, because you always have options. Things are not just that black and white, right? And speak to multiple people, get different opinions.
Yeah.
And then that way you're more educated now, and then you can tackle those issues
Exactly.
with a little, with less fog, as I like to say, in a clearer mindset.
100%.
So, yeah, I think.
And I was going to ask you, I think I froze.
That's okay. So I actually had a question for you also, because we have several clients that also purchase co-ops, not just single-family properties or multifamily properties. And we know that there's a difference between both, but then there's buyers that think they don't need an inspection for a co-op or a condo.
Right.
What's your take to that?
Well, yeah, a lot of people think that because I'm buying a co-op or a condo, it's part of, there's HOA fees that we're paying, and I don't need to get an inspection because of those reasons. It's in a building. I don't have to worry about shoveling snow. I don't got to worry about garbage, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the fact of the matter is, it's still a living home, right? You still got electrical systems. You still got a plumbing system.
Yes.
There's still windows in the house. There are walls. There are floors, right? So taking those things into account, these are things that we look at as home inspectors, right? Are your floors sagging? Are your walls bowing? Is there lead paint in the house? Is there asbestos? Are your windows opening and closing properly? And it's so simple, right? Windows, doors, we use them every day. They're always in every facet. I mean, in this office, there's windows and doors. What we take for granted, but how many times don't you open a door and it slams shut behind you?
Yeah.
Or you open a window and it just drops.
Yes.
Eventually, that window can break,
Yeah.
and it could hurt somebody.
Yeah.
And then affect the energy efficiency of the home, if I have to get technical, right? So it really makes a difference if you get these things checked, because, for example, in a co-op or a condo, you're paying HOA. Roofs are normally covered under
Correct.
HOA. Windows, because they're part of the exterior,
Yes.
are covered under the HOA. And so if you identify during the inspection that these are issues, or there's potential issues that might be small, but if not cared for in time, could be bigger issues. You can simply make a phone call to your board and say, hey, look, can you send a repair person up here to come look at this, or a handyman to kind of take care of this? And they can. So you don't have to live with, with an issue just because you didn't know. And like I was saying earlier, outlets, there's a lot of DIY. A lot of people, you go to Home Depot and they have all these new outlets now that have those plugs that you can plug in your phone charger.
Yes.
So a lot of people are doing those upgrades. What if in a co-op or in a condo, they did that, but they didn't wire the outlet correctly?
Oh,
right? That could be a
Correct.
fire hazard.
Yes, that could
You
be
know,
a
and then
fire
that can
hazard.
affect the whole unit.
Mhm.
Yeah, so you know, some of these units they're not cheap either. You know, you're still spending $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000
Exactly, to
on
purchase.
a co-op or
And some of them even more.
or
depends
yeah,
on
some
the
even
area.
more. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm low cutting
Yes.
it, but
Right.
you know, again, not an ideal situation where you want to waive an inspection just because
Exactly.
you think it's
Exactly.
not a house.
Right.
It's still a
Right.
space where you're gonna live.
And also I get the question of, well, I mean, I can always call the board and they can fix it,
Mhm.
but then you already moved in. What if you have to repaint? Because something has to be fixed on the foundation, right?
Correct.
Or I have to remove now the tiles because there was a leak that I didn't see it prior.
Mhm,
I
exactly.
already did some renovation and I'm comfortable where I'm living, but I didn't realize there was something else happening that I
Mhm.
didn't see it.
You bring up a good point. You know,
So-
recently I was doing an inspection on a co-op, and we go in there with a lot of tools,
Mhm.
and I was checking for moisture and humidity
Mhm.
on the exterior walls, and I noticed that there was one particular wall near a window
Yeah.
that had just a high concentration of moisture,
Mhm.
meaning that it's wet,
Mhm.
right? But the seller's there. The owner of the property is there, and she's watching me,
Mhm.
and I'm explaining to the sellers what I'm finding. And she goes, yeah, so what happens there is, outside that window, because it's the first floor,
Mhm.
the sprinklers for the lawn is right outside.
Oh.
Oh,
So she, in the summer, opens her windows,
yes.
but when the sprinkler's on, it wets the inside of her house.
Yeah.
And so, great, I'm glad you even said that. I'm glad we found this, because you know what? It's not an issue that's happening inside the house.
Exactly.
It's from the exterior.
Mhm.
That's a quick phone call to the board.
Mhm.
Yes.
Hey, your sprinkler head is
Yeah.
literally in front of my window. Can you just redirect it?
Correct.
Problem solved. And now we don't have to go ahead and change our entire wall because of it.
Exactly.
I mean, we have to remedy the issue that we have now,
Mhm.
but at least we identified the source. And so these inspections lead, like I said, we're detectives,
Mhm.
and we're there to figure things out.
Correct.
You know, so we're always asking little questions or big questions to get to the root of the issue.
Right.
And ideally, it's getting to that root of that issue. And listen, in some cases, we just won't know.
Yeah.
You know, the one thing we cannot do is go into a house and break open a wall.
Right.
I'm not there to rip apart walls.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not there to tell you if, you know, this room has insulation and what kind of insulation it is by tearing open a
No,
wall.
of course.
Mhm.
Now, we do have equipment and we do have tools that are made
Yeah.
available that allows us to see if a home is insulated or not.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I'm not, you know, I can't open it to tell you if that a wooden
Right.
beam, is that an aluminum beam,
Right,
No, of
right.
course
is that an
not.
I-beam?
Mhm.
You know, it's just, if the wall is covered, the wall is covered.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
so yeah, that's
You can only determine it by what you actually see on the surface.
correct at that time of the inspection.
Yes.
Correct. Mhm.
Mhm.
I'm talking about that. When you do inspection, what are the things that are not covered, or the items that are not covered in a standard inspection?
That are not covered in the
Not
standard
covered.
inspection. So we don't look at cosmetic items,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
right? We don't look at the style of paints.
Right.
We don't look at the colors. We don't look at the type of lamps that you're using.
Mm-hmm.
Those are things that kind of leave to you. So long as the space is, let's say for a bedroom, is the right square footage for that house, but we don't also look at the size of the home. That's not something that's covered in it. We don't look at violations for the home.
Okay.
I know some folks always ask me, like, how do I know if there's any violations?
Yeah.
Well, that's through your attorneys and the title company
Correct.
to identify if there's any violations
Yeah.
on the home. But generally, it's just that, you know, we're looking at those main components of the home and everything in between, right? But
Right.
typically, those are the items that we really just don't
Right.
focus on.
And those are really the
Yeah.
main important concepts and components that you're looking for because you're saving money.
Right. Right.
That's
No,
what it
and
comes
listen,
down to.
and at the end of the inspection, well, some people may think, oh, you know, that inspection is so expensive. Well, you're paying for peace of mind, right? And out of that peace of mind, who knows? Maybe from there, you know, you may partner with your realtor and go back and negotiate a better deal where,
Exactly.
you know, you're reducing the price of the home, you're getting a credit, or maybe they're installing something new or repairing something that, you know, you don't have to incur. So at the end of the day, where you spend a couple of dollars, now you're getting hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars back
Yeah.
on the back end, you know, I mean, so.
And
And I
also,
think, yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
and also, if we were to go back to homes instead of the co-ops
Yeah.
and buildings in general, I remember actually just a few years back when I was making a purchase, there was a little bit of a leak downstairs in the basement, and one of the main things,
Yeah.
the concern was termites.
Mm.
So that's another, and thankfully I didn't have termites. It was just a little leak that had just started, easy to fix and repair. But what happens if you actually don't bring in an inspector and there is a termite
Yeah.
Right,
situation?
so to your question earlier, What are things that are not covered in an inspection?
Yes.
Termite inspections are not part of a home inspection.
Additional.
Right, that's an additional service that's added into the inspection. Not every home inspector is a licensed termite inspector, so that's a separate license, right? With New York State. So while it's important that you get yourself a licensed home inspector for the state that you're buying the home in, make sure that inspector is also licensed in termite inspections. Now, can a home inspector identify what termite activity looks like? Yeah, 1,000%. You know, we all know a lot of things, but are you licensed to speak on it? Are you licensed to provide paperwork on it? That's a different, you know, level of conversation. And so, you know, I am licensed termite inspector. And in that situation, you know, there are situations where you do find termite damage. Question then becomes is how bad is that termite damage? Are they active? Are they not active? You know, they're wood destroying insects. So termites get into your house and they travel within the wood.
Yeah.
So you don't even see the traces outside. So if you look at it from the exterior, it looks great. This table looks good. Looks brand new to me. But the moment I start testing it, it starts crumbling. And then you see the whole colony of termites inside. And then that's an issue. So if the activity is active, it's a big concern. Water does attract termites because they like the moisture in order to get into the property. You know, they travel from outside and then get into the house. There are ways to identify if they're traveling around the property. You know, what we look for is mud tubes. You know, so there are traces of mud tubes that they create like little tunnels, and they travel through there in order to get into the wood. So sometimes you see them on concrete walls, you see them on sheetrock, but eventually they lead to wood. And then, you know, that's where, you know, the issue happens. Now, let's say, for example, you got termite damage. Well, some people may downplay it. But if they're eating main support beams, if they're eating the joists of the house, that's a big concern because that's the difference between you stepping in the wrong part of your house and then having your foot going downstairs, you know, or your house kind of bowing because of it. So I've seen some pretty bad damages. Either way, they are really important to address, no matter what stage of the damage is, but it's really important to address.
And the earlier you address them, the better also.
Yes.
And what about the odorless gas? I know in other states they have something like an odorless gas where they put the machine, you know, and all of that. But I think in Queens it's not that common. But I think some people still prefer doing it. Can you tell me more about the? Yeah,
so that odorless gas, I don't know if you're referring to carbon monoxide or you're referring to radon.
Radon.
Right, because they're both odorless.
Yes.
Right? So radon gas is a radioactive gas that comes from the earth. And so you typically see that a little further north. You know, once you start hitting, you know, mid-Westchester, some parts of lower Westchester, and further up. In the city, you don't really see it because there's not a lot of bedrock around the homes, right? And so it's a radioactive gas that enters the home. It's natural, just like the air we're breathing now. But if that gas is not circulated properly and ventilated out of the home, through a period of time, it can create health issues in the people living and occupying the space. It's been known that radon is the second leading cause of lung cancer.
Wow.
Second to smoking. So smokers can get lung cancer, and then non-smokers can get lung cancer, and it's usually a result of that gas, which is radon. So it's really important that you test for it. The EPA recommends that if your house has a higher elevation, because there are elevations that are acceptable, and then there's elevations that are not acceptable. And so they recommend that if there is any signs of radon in your home, that you test every 2 years, just to make sure you're staying on top of it. And if in the event that you do have radon, there's a system that you can install. It's called the mitigation system, radon mitigation system. And then what it does, it kind of just recirculates that air and gets it out of the house, so the house can be inhabitable and safe. Right, at the end of the day, that's what we're looking for, is safety, right? But you know, it's a device that we put in the house. Usually it sits there for about 48 hours, in some cases longer, and then either it gets lab tested or it generates a report directly on the spot, depending on the equipment that the home inspector is using. Right. So
that's good. And talking about safety, I know like people who have older homes, they have oil tank in their houses, right? And usually they have the people come in, they remove it and they change the gas. And sometimes when you're not careful, the oil leaks to the floor. And I've heard, I'm not sure how true this is, but it's not good if the oil goes under the ground, right?
Correct.
Can you tell me more about that? I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's like the big conundrum of real estate. You know, I have a home that I want to buy, but it's an older home and it's on oil system. You know, is that more efficient than gas? You know, should I switch to gas? And everything just depends on the consumer, right? the prices of oil do fluctuate
Okay.
when you're buying and you're getting that delivery,
Yeah.
right? Because you got to get a delivery
Of course.
every month, 2-3 months, depending on how you consume. And then in some cases, that boiler that operates the heating system also provides hot water. So
Yes.
sometimes it's a dual system, and so your consumption of oil is
Yeah.
then higher, right? As opposed to a municipal source, which is gas, natural gas from Con Edison or Natural Grid, where there is no delivery. It's just a supply line that's
It's a
connected to your
supply
house, and you're constantly getting natural gas. So, if to answer your question, if you want to switch over to oil, to gas, you can. It's definitely doable, but I always recommend that if you are planning on switching over your heating source from either oil to natural gas or propane, that you consult with your municipality to see if the gas line reaches your property. Because sometimes if you have oil, it's probably because the municipality does not have natural gas leading into that property, in which case then your option would be propane. Now let's say you have an oil tank and it's leaking underground, then that's an environmental concern, right? Because now the soil is being compromised. And so at that point, it's going to require a different level of assessment from an environmental company to come in and assess the terrain to see how bad the damage is, how much has leaked, and if it needs to be excavated in order to remedy it properly. If you have a house that you're purchasing and it has a buried oil tank, some banks frown upon that because of the issue that we're talking about, right? I mean, it's been underground for how many years? 30 years, 40 years? Has it rusted out?
Right.
Is there a leak? What about those copper lines that come out of there to feed the oil tank? Are those busted? Are those leaking? Right? How do we know? So now we got to go in with special equipment and find the oil tank, excavate, check out the oil tank, see the condition of it, report on it, and then test it with air pressure and everything else to see if there's any leaks or any pinholes that might be allowing oil to leak. So it becomes more complicated when you look at those situations. But can you convert 1,000,000%? First, always check with your municipality, check with your town, and see if it's something that's within the reach of doing so. So you have a good question.
And what if you actually purchasing? You're not the seller, but you are actually the buyer, and you're finding this situation when you are purchasing the property. That's going to extend, of course, even the time that it's going to take for you to be able to purchase, correct?
I don't think it will extend the time. I think that if you are the realtor and you decided to show a home to your buyer, right? I gotta bring it back a little bit. If you're the realtor, you're showing a home and you know it's in the paperwork, or you find out through conversation with the listing agent that there's a buried tank, right? You get ahead of it. Right, because now you know,
Correct.
like, I'm probably going to need this assessment. Let me speak to the banker, see if this is a requirement of theirs. And then as you're booking the home inspection, try to book now, what information do we have on this oil tank?
Yes.
Right? Can we do this simultaneously? And if you time it properly, you don't really skip a beat.
Okay.
And you still fit into the timeline of that 45-day period or whatever time it takes to close. Now, if there's obvious issues with the tank that are uncovered during the review, then that can put into the paperwork and you guys can work things out. But I never seen a case where it extends the closing. It's just another thing to deal with,
Correct.
but not anything that would.
Not in terms of being.
Right. Because it's like me finding a damaged roof, right?
Yes.
If I find a damaged roof, you got 45 days.
That's
You know,
true.
get a contractor in there, they can fix it in 1 day,
That's
in
great.
2 days. And then you stay on time and your timeline still meets,
Correct.
the norm.
The deadline
Yeah.
or the norm.
Yeah.
That's great. And what about mold?
Mold. Yeah, you could just spray vinegar on it, or you could just spray,
Exactly, that's
or you could
why.
just spray Clorox or bleach on it.
I know people will say, well, it's just condensation. How do you
Yeah.
determine mold?
So again, when you're dealing with mold, make sure that your inspector, before they start telling you this house has mold, that they're licensed in that specific
Yes.
area. Right, really important. But we all know what mold looks like.
Yeah.
The most common mold that people identify is black mold. But they come in different colors and shapes and sizes. There's white mold that looks like snow. There's a whole bunch of different things that sometimes are not visible to people. Attics are notorious for having mold. If you look at the sheathing, if you look at the plywood on top or the OSB boards, and they look black, that's typically a sign of moisture collecting and then creating mold. One thing I will say about mold, don't spray Clorox on it. Don't spray bleach because it actually feeds the organisms and it makes them grow stronger. Don't get into the habit of just wiping it off and thinking everything is going to be okay. You haven't fixed the issue. The issue's still there. right? Because it's caused by moisture,
Yeah.
right? So let's fix the root of the issue,
Mm-hmm.
right? But if you do have a situation where there's mold, I recommend that you get it mediated properly, get it removed by someone who's trained and licensed in doing that properly, because ultimately those spores get into your respiratory system.
Yeah.
You know, it's crazy. You never really think that a home can affect your health,
Right.
right? Your respiratory system, right? If you have asthma or if you suffer from, you know, any other pre-existing conditions, you can just make it worse by not knowing. And so, again, look how important the home inspection turns out to be, because it's like, wow,
It's crucial.
you know, my kid grew up and he has asthma. Now I'm making it worse and I didn't even know.
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know, I moved into this house when I was 20. Now I'm 55 and I got, you know, lung cancer, but I don't even smoke. Why? Because we didn't do the research, we didn't do the homework, but there's no talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
There's no dialogue. So I'm glad that you asking these questions, because it really sheds a light into these things. You know, home inspections are fun, and they're really insightful. But knowing is great. When you know these things, you're more prepared.
Yeah.
You know?
Correct.
And it's one of their biggest purchases of their life, right? They have to invest in
Such a big
inspection.
investment.
It just affects everything.
Exactly.
Yeah, you know, I know that there's a seller's disclosure agreement,
Yes.
right? So if you are selling a house,
Yeah.
I'll use you guys for example.
Yeah.
You're the seller, you're the buyer. If you're selling a home, you have to, by law, disclose issues that you've had with the house, right?
Yes.
Flooding issues, fires,
Yeah.
things of that sort. And then you, as the buyer, you get to see this and you say, okay, well, this is the condition of the home. I don't need an inspection because she's disclosing everything.
But that's not accurate.
That's not accurate, right? She can omit certain things because she's reporting
Correct.
to the best of her knowledge.
Yes.
And what if you don't know?
Right? What if you don't know? What if she's an
Right.
absent owner?
Right.
What if it was just an investment property and she was never really home? Or she has bad memory and she forgets things, right? Doing your own assessment really, really, really matters, because you get to really know if those issues happen. Was there a fire? You know, was it done properly? You
Yeah.
know, how much damage took place? You know, was there a flood? Did they
Yeah.
fix the main issue where the water came from? So, you know, it's, I mean, I can go all day long
Yeah,
as to
of
why
course,
we need
yeah.
home inspections, but
Of course.
Yeah.
But I think we covered a lot of very
Yeah.
important information, and mainly it's for everybody to understand it's not just selling or purchasing a property,
right,
it's your whole entire life that revolves around the property.
Yes.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And
100%.
taking this initiative and saying, I'm going to be a responsible buyer and getting an inspector, it puts you really so much further up with everything that you're going to do within the house.
Yes.
From the
100%.
time that you purchase to anything else that you do.
Not only that, I think also just take it a step further. You
Yeah.
know, let's say we're actual homeowners right now.
Right.
Now, let's say this is your home,
Yes.
right? You've been living it for 5 years,
Yeah.
you know, and Christmas is coming around the corner. We got the Christmas tree up.
Right.
You're bringing your family over. Don't you want to make sure your heating system is working properly?
Yeah.
Don't you want to make sure that, you know, your first floor can support an extra 6 air mattresses?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right, so I think that, you know, oftentimes I do recommend that we get our homes reevaluated, either annually or every 2 years, just to see, as we're living in it, as we're doing things, how the house is performing
Correct.
to your lifestyle. Right, just because you moved in doesn't mean everything goes away. Maybe new issues are appearing now that you're opening and closing your windows. Now that you're opening and closing these doors. Now that you added more space heaters in the room.
Yes.
Are your walls now cracking? Are your, you know, are
Or
the
even
frames?
after a renovation.
Right, or after a renovation, you know, maybe you added more weight upstairs, and now it's adding, you know, more
Yes.
support downstairs.
Yes.
Whatever it is, but I always believe that even after you live in it, keep getting it checked.
Yes.
You know, keep getting that scorecard,
Yeah.
that report card on your home,
Correct.
Yeah.
just to see. I have a lot of clients that call me annually and just say,
Yes.
just come look, and it doesn't take as long as an hour and a half. Because I already have the full details of the home, right?
Correct.
So going in, I'll probably be there 20, 30 minutes.
Nice.
I'm looking at certain things that I wanted to look at from last year to see how it's performing.
Yes.
And maybe you did new things, I'll look at those items
Exactly.
just to see how we're moving along.
Correct.
Yeah.
And like you were saying before also, if you see something cracked, take a look at it further. Don't just think that it's okay, maybe I just need to paint a little bit. If you have been living into the house for a year, 2, 3, 5, whatever the case may be, and you start seeing these little things, get a home inspection. Because again, you are actually intervening before something major happens.
That's right.
1000%.
Yeah.
You know, also look at too, like if the house next door to you is going through a construction, but it's a full cut construction, like they're gutting out the basement,
Yes.
they're excavating ground.
Yeah.
Pay attention to your home if you're next to that, right? Because that means that the foundation, the dirt, is shifting,
Yeah.
right? And that might offset your foundation,
foundation.
just a slight bit. Although it shouldn't, but you never know,
Yeah.
right? So I always tell people, I always tell realtors, I always tell everybody that I can tell, if you have a vertical line, a vertical crack in your house, that's one thing. If you have a horizontal crack in your house, that's something else. Which one do you think is the worst one? The horizontal one, right?
Yes.
So if your line, if you got a crack in your house and it's
Yeah.
going across from left to right, call me,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah.
Call somebody, call a professional to have it looked at, because that means that there is some serious shift in weight, and now your house is either
Yeah.
going to go left or right,
Yes.
right? And so that's something you want to look at. Not to say that the horizontal one
No.
is
Of course.
the vertical one is not
Both of
good,
them could
but
be,
they're both
exactly.
important. But just word of caution.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, before we let you go, is there anything else that you want to like share as a tip for some home buyers, maybe before for inspection, I guess?
Yeah, so for first time buyers, I guess the tips that I would give is going with an open mindset,
Yeah.
right? Not every house is perfect, right? Focus on the big ticket items, not the small items, not, your light switch is upside down,
Right.
your light bulb is
Yes.
busted. Focus on the big ticket items. And then use the report to speak to your realtor,
Yes.
right? To see if there's any place to negotiate.
Absolutely.
Don't negotiate directly with the sellers, because that's never going to work to your
Yeah.
advantage. And I guess for sellers, my word of advice to those folks that are looking to sell their property and wanted to sell for the maximum value, right? Because that's what they want at the end of the day. Is just that clean your home properly, make sure everything is accessible, and fix the visible items that need fixing, right? Like I was mentioning earlier, chipped paint, your light bulbs.
Yeah.
If you have any leaks, take care of that. And then everything from there should be a lot smoother. And just open communication with your agents that are representing the transaction, because I think that's the most important part of the deal.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much it. I like to keep it simple.
Yeah,
Yeah.
nice.
That's great.
Yeah.
And also just to kind of like speak more about the first-time home buyers when they're walking into the inspection, right? I personally tell them like mostly focusing on is the plumbing part of it, the roof,
Yeah.
the structure, what is it? The drain.
The drain.
Yeah.
Yes.
These are the things that we should be looking out for, right?
100%.
Majorly.
Correct.
Okay.
100%.
Yeah.
Obviously the roof,
Yeah,
right?
yes,
The
of
heating and the
course.
cooling
Yeah.
system. So these are all the main components.
Yeah, the main components.
Right, that we want to look at.
Yeah.
To further your point, I also recommend that they're present for the inspection,
Yeah.
right? That they're
Yeah.
there, so I can walk with them and show them, hey, look, this is the defect that we found. You have a hole here, but this is what caused the hole. This is why it's here, or this is what it's for, right? Maybe it's intentional. Maybe it's supposed to be there.
Correct.
And kind of explaining that to them. Because what happens if I'm not there to explain that to you? I'm sorry, if you're not there to hear the explanation, and you're reading it on a report,
Yeah.
it's still kind of unclear, right?
Right,
Kind of leaves
correct.
questions like,
Right.
well, what did he mean by that? What what does that really mean? Although I'm adding pictures and videos to the report, what does that really mean? So being there is also important. And I know a lot of home inspectors are going to kill me for this. If you have an uncle or someone who just knows a little bit about construction and is going to give you that peace of mind because they're looking out for your best interest, bring them.
Yes.
Bring them. I know home inspectors are going to chastise me for this, but bring them, because what happens is they're there to give you comfort. Might not be the right comfort, might not be the best advice, because they might be looking at things from a different point of view,
Yes.
and they may lengthen the inspection, but I know that they are the person who you trust to
Yeah.
kind of say, hey, I got you covered,
Yeah,
don't worry.
correct.
Bring them. I'll have the conversation with them, whether they're contractors, whether they're electricians, plumbers. We'll go through it with them, and if they have the peace of mind, you have the peace of mind.
Yes.
So we're open to
100%.
all of it,
Yes.
So
Yeah.
just be present.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you so much, Felix, for coming here and
Awesome.
sharing
Yeah,
all the
no.
information.
Thanks
We
for
really
having me.
appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
For our viewers who want to contact you, how can they contact you directly?
Yeah, so you guys can find me on Instagram, Felix Inspections, or you can just call me at 917-208-2345, or just go to my website, which is felixinspections.com. Really accessible. I'm also fluent in Spanish. So si necesitan algo para una compra de una casa, sean un comprador o un vendedor, estamos a su disposición. I just said I'm here every year.
Yes.
And that's it. I'm easy to find. Ask your neighbor, ask your realtor friend.
Mm-hmm.
They should have my info. If they don't, they'll get it. And I'm here for you guys.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you so much again. We were here today with John Felix from Felix Inspections, and we are Wellness and Wealth Realtors with you. We're going to be with you every week, and we're going to provide you more information. If you have any questions, right below this video, we're going to provide Felix's information, and you can also write some of the comments that you have, and we're going to take a few minutes from our next video in order to answer them. Thank you for being here again. Subscribe, like, and we'll provide you more tips. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Perfect.